Audio is not there. Send a message. Email ID to अच्छी. मैं तो जाइए था उनको पर से पाऊँ. मैं मन में बार बकलिया पड़ी ना email.
Video रो audio टा बोल.
So Charita ji, hasn't the link been sent to Dr. Tharoor yet? Nikita? Dr. Tharoor does not have the link to join.
Ma'am, I had sent him the link on the email ID that you had shared with me yesterday.
Which is the email ID?
Let me just cross-check.
One minute, John.
Office@tharoor.in.
Office@tharoor.in. The link has been sent on that. Did you get it? Yeah, I'm holding.
Send कर चुना सही तरह पठाए था send mail का.
हाँ तो मेरे को आप ईमेल आईडी बताओ ना, मैं अपने से भेज रहा हूँ, मैं तुम्हारे से कैसे भेजूंगा? तुम्हारे पास ईमेल थोड़ी है वो.
निरंजन पटनायक PATNAIK RANJN PATNAIK @office@gmail.com.
What do you want? Like you want
Niranjan.
You want like a graphic or something? Yeah, so I can just send it. The graphic I can send it across to you.
WhatsApp.
Okay, doing it.
From Pradeep. Please join using this link.
Nikita, can you hear me? Just double check the link, please.
Let me just cross-check, ma'am. But it's already sent. I just cross-checked. But let me resend it. Zarita ma'am, I've already shared resent the link, ID and password to Dr. Tharoor.
Shashi Tharoor right here. Hello. Good to see you all.
Good evening, namaskar, sir.
Namaskar. Good evening.
Yeah, yes.
This is office@tharoor.in.
Sir, you need to check the WhatsApp. I've sent you the required thing that you just asked John, sir.
Okay, will do.
Yeah.
All right, we can get started whenever you're ready.
Good evening, namaskar, sir.
Namaskar.
Nikita, can you please check why is it echoing, please? There's an echo of the sound, everything that is being said. Can you kindly check on that before we begin?
I think everything is in order. We can start the event. We started the live broadcast as well. And participants will be able to mute and unmute themselves as and when required. They will not have to request me to do that.
Okay, thank you so much, Nikita.
You're welcome, ma'am.
साहब कहाँ मिले थे?
Suchaita ji, should we begin the program, please? Because our chairman has already arrived. Saurav ji, please unmute yourself.
Ma'am,
Good evening, ma'am. Namaskar.
Sucharita,
Namaskar ji, Suchaita ji.
ma'am is.
I think
Sucharita ma'am
Sucharita is there,
uh,
but not unmuted. That's the problem.
she's trying to reach out to.
Good evening,
the PCC
everyone. Good
president.
evening, Jarita
Okay.
madam. I
Good
think
evening.
we are all set. I can't hear anyone.
Please continue, Sucharita. We're all here and listening to you.
Hello.
Suchaita ji, please continue. We can hear you.
Nikita, I have a problem. I can't hear anyone.
Ma'am, that should be a problem with your. There should be a problem with your audio. We are able to hear you, and we are able to hear everybody else on the panel. We are good to go, ma'am.
Please continue, Sucharita. We're all here and listening to you.
Hello. Suchaita ji, please continue. We can hear you. I have a problem. I can't hear anyone.
आवाज ज्यादा है।
Ma'am, could you please check if your audio
I'm not able to listen.
is fine? I hope you've not unmuted anybody.
Sucharita ma'am having some issues, so she's trying to join back. So,
Perhaps we could have her participate at a later stage, and let's get the show on the road.
Yeah.
People are waiting.
Thank you. Hello, may I request to Jarita ma'am, please proceed. Chairman.
As a matter of fact, actually, Suchaita ji is supposed to do the welcome address and.
That we know. That is a technical. That's a
Yes,
technical
but
issue, I
I'm
think.
supposed to begin with introduction of the chairman,
Yeah.
but without the president, I think you should do the welcome address, please, Saurav ji, and then I'll give the introduction of the chairman, and then you can take over after that. Saurav ji, you can do the introduction, please. I mean the welcome address, please. Saurav ji, kindly unmute yourself.
Good evening, all. Hello. Are you hearing?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Please continue.
Yeah. Good evening, all. Good evening. Today, in this twilight evening, the birth anniversary of late Brajamohan Mohanty, the legend of Odisha, a freedom fighter, a union minister, and ex-speaker, also ex-revenue minister of Odisha and PCC president of Odisha. And next to, we can say him as Gopabandhu of Odisha, and also a Gandhian, known Gandhian of Odisha. In this evening, we are so happy that our chairman, Honorable Dr. Shashi Tharoor ji, here with to deliver the lecture on Brajamohan Mohanty Memorial. The topic is the future of democracy. May I request to Jarita ma'am please, our regional coordinator, Jarita Ma'am, please proceed and welcome Dr. Tharoor to start it. Thanks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and it is an absolute honor to be introducing our speaker today. Well, he does not need any introduction, but it is an honor to be introducing him to the audience today. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, a third-term member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, is the best-selling author of 22 books. Besides being a former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and former Minister of State for Human Resource Development and for the External Affairs in the Government of India. He has won numerous awards, including the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman, a Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and the Crossword Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2019, Dr. Tharoor was also awarded the Sahitya Academy Award in the category of the English non-fiction for his book, An Era of Darkness. He chairs the Parliament's Standing Committee on Information Technology. It is an honor to have our chairman today as a speaker on this program. Good evening, sir, and a very welcome to this program.
Thank you very much, and very good to see you all. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to address you today, and I must say that it really is a particular honor that this is in the name of a great son of Odisha, a great hero to the people of the state, and naturally to the All India Professionals Congress. The Brajamohan Mohanty Memorial Lecture calls upon me to share my thoughts on what the future holds for India, a nation that now finds itself at a significant crossroads, where decisions are being made every single day that have great ramifications for our people, and where we are increasingly seeing a fundamental contestation between two very different ideas of India itself. Some of these momentous events are undoubtedly domestic in the origin. Some, of course, are linked to the populist ethnocentrism we are seeing rising around the world. So in the memory of this great freedom fighter, who was a union minister and a longtime representative of the spiritual hub of Puri, but above all was Mohanty Sahib in Delhi and remained Brajababu in his beloved Odisha, I'm honored to speak to all of you today on these important themes. Now, we are, of course, approaching the 74th anniversary of India's independence next year. Next year is itself only 12 days away. And we must never forget that those immortal words with which Jawaharlal Nehru proclaimed a tryst with destiny, a moment which comes but rarely in history, when we pass from the old to the new, when an age ends and when the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. And you know, what's extraordinary about India was that the very experiment in democratic governance was so unusual in a country, because no other country in the world embraces such an extraordinary mixture of ethnic groups, the profusion of mutually incomprehensible languages, our varieties of topography and climate, the diversity of religions and cultural practices, and the range of levels of economic development that India does. So what does the future of our democracy look like from the vantage point of today, December 2020? Well, you know that anything you can say about India can be immediately contradicted by the opposite. You know, the joke is that anything you can say about India, the opposite is also true. Ironically, our country's national motto, emblazoned on the governmental crest, is Satyameva Jayate, truth alone triumphs. But the question remains, however, whose truth? It's a question to which there are at least 1.3 billion answers. And that is if the last census hasn't undercounted us again. Now, I've long argued that the singular thing about India is that you can only speak of it in the plural, that everything exists in our country in countless variants. There's no single standard, no fixed stereotype, no one way of doing things. And that this pluralism is basic to India. It is acknowledged in the way India arranges its own affairs. All groups, faiths, tastes, and ideologies survive and contend for their place in the sun. At a time when most developing countries opted for authoritarian models of government, the fact is that we chose to be a multi-party democracy. And a multi-party democracy we have remained despite many, many stresses and strains. freewheeling, rumbustious, sometimes people might say corrupt and inefficient perhaps, but nonetheless flourishing. So one result is that India strikes many as maddening, chaotic, divided, and seemingly unpurposeful as it muddles its way into the third decade of the 21st century. But another, though, is that India is not just a country, it's an adventure. India, wrote the British historian E.P. Thompson, is perhaps the most important country for the future of the world. All the convergent influences of the world, he wrote, run through this society. There is not a thought that is being thought in the West or the East that is not active in some Indian mind. Now, the thoughts that are active today are of momentous change in the very basis of Indian nationhood. As I'm sure all of us recognize, across the world, questions are being asked about the future of many countries, the future of nationalism, the viability of the idea of the nation, the survival even of the nation state. This is the theme of my new book, The Battle of Belonging, which I've published just last month. So as identity-based ethnic nationalism reasserts itself in the third decade of the 21st century, can it afford to revert to the old models of the 20th? Despite the promise of a vaccine, the post-coronavirus world seems to be continuing its retreat behind protectionist barriers. Are we witnessing a revival of nationalism, primordial identities? Mr. Trump said, "Make America great again." Mr. Modi saying, "Atmanirbhar Bharat." Is it going to be every country for itself? If so, will the characteristics of nationalism be reaffirmed or changed? And in what way? If not, are there alternatives to the civic nationalism that seem to represent the direction of the modern nation state? And where will and where should India go? So when we look at democracy in India, because your topic that you've given me is the future of democracy, we have to look at the trends of today. One could argue that democracy is so intrinsic to the Indian identity and to India's way of doing things that democracy's future is secure. But we are looking at a time when the BJP government of Narendra Modi, animated by its fervor for the chauvinistic and distorted, sorry, could you mute everybody else? I'm hearing a lot of conversations from other people which are interrupting my thoughts. Thank you. So the government, animated by its chauvinistic and distorted militarized version of what they call Hindutva, appears determined to promote its version of ethnic nationalism. And in their project to redefine this understanding of India, I would say three big trends have emerged that affect the future of India. To establish a shared myth of common Hindu identity for Indian nationhood, derived, they say, from a common Hindu ancestry, justified by rewriting Indian history, promoting new national slogans like Bharat Mata Ki Jai, which they deny people the freedom not to say, introducing a religious test for citizenship through the Citizenship Amendment Act, threatening a national register of citizens, building Ram Mandir Ayodhya, and so on and so forth. So many examples of this new Hinduization, as it were, of Indian democracy. Second, to entrench its conception of majoritarian nationalism through such devices as the signaling of soft bigotry against minorities, the use of mob violence and riots targeting Muslims, cow vigilantism, the criminalization of triple talaq, and the assault on the autonomy of Jammu and Kashmir and the disposal of Article 370 and so on. And the third big trend has been to secure a Hindu ethnic nationalism or Hindutva ethnic nationalism through the effective centralization of authority and top-down unitary rule by a strongman leader. This has entailed the promotion of what I call Moditva, which is Hindutva plus Mr. Modi, a personality cult around the Prime Minister, the remaking of the national ethos through what I've dubbed the Modification of India, the subversion of India's institutions and their subordination to the ruling party's agenda, and the weakening of federalism and its practices by ensuring that financial resources and political clout shift irretrievably towards the Hindi heartland of northern India. Now, these are threats to our democracy. The Constitution of India established the shared norms on which self-government rests. In particular, the statutory equality of every citizen, irrespective of religion, region, or language. What I describe in my book as India's civic nationalism is both created by and reflected in these provisions of the Constitution. The Constitution granted representation not to an Indian's predetermined identity that you're born with, like your religion, your caste, your region, your language, but instead to each individual citizen, each individual's expression of his or her own agency. The governments it creates are supposed to be committed to the welfare of the country's weakest citizens, including its poor, its low caste, its minorities. Though poverty, social discrimination, and caste tyranny still persist, the Constitution offers the victims protection and redress. Amid the myriad problems of India, it is constitutional democracy that has given Indians of every imaginable caste, creed, culture, and cause the chance to break free of their lot. This rests on a core assumption of civic nationalism, the development and strengthening of free institutions that ensure pluralism, protect diversity, and guarantee the integrity of the state. India's liberal, inclusive, and just constitution, based unambiguously on the principles of civic nationalism, has been the bedrock of our society, a guiding document that historically secured the inalienable rights of all Indians. It has not only consolidated and distilled the best of our democratic values, ideals for which our forefathers gave their lives at the height of our national struggle, but it has served to liberate the collective aspirations of our people. For 70 years, the Constitution has served as a reminder that our country was always greater than the sum of our differences, and that our diversity of thought, expression, and ideology was and remains our greatest strength. The Constitution allowed Indians to create their individual political identity and thus collectively to fashion the nation's destiny. But as Dr. Ambedkar, the architect of India's Constitution, presciently warned, a Constitution is only as good as those who work it. That is where, sadly, India seems today to be falling short of the ideals it enshrines. The alternative Hindutva nationalist vision of the BJP has fundamentally threatened the assumptions of India's constitutional, civic nationalism and liberal democracy. The breathtaking speed with which the re-elected government in 2019 has introduced and cleared far-reaching laws such as the RTI Amendment Act to gut the independence of the Right to Information Commissioners, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act to assume sweeping powers of arrest and detention, the abrogation of Article 370, we already mentioned it, which had guaranteed autonomy to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the Citizenship Amendment Act, which for the first time introduced a religious test for Indian citizenship by fast-tracking citizenship for refugees from neighboring countries, provided they are not Muslim. All of these pose a fundamental threat to the future of the freedoms that we've taken for granted, every one of them grounded in the tenets of India's civic nationalism since our independence from colonial rule in 1947. One of the core tenets of our system is participatory democracy, where each section of society has the chance to express itself during the process of lawmaking. As the masses of farmers at the Delhi border continue to swell, protesting against the injustice meted out to them by the new farm laws, it is clear that this government has little time for such formalities as consultative lawmaking. The process itself has been conveniently curtailed, with the winter session of Parliament being suspended in the name of pandemic measures, as if opening malls and schools were far less risky. Far more worrying, however, is a remarkable shift in pace in the ruling party's ambition from the first innings of their government to the second innings. They're openly undermining the Constitution, not just whispering about changing it. They are enacting the idea that some Indians are first and others are last. They're openly ensuring that from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, the very experience of Indianness and what it means to be an Indian is different. And they're going from asserting control over independent national institutions to openly using them as instruments of their political agenda. All of this makes it abundantly clear that the present ruling dispensation is remaking our democratic country into a populist communalist, chauvinist, authoritarian, slickly marketed and power-hungry kakistocracy, supported by stoked-up vigilante mobs, all in the name of their majority government and at the expense of those public institutions that were intended to safeguard the rights of all Indians. And they're doing so in the name of what the PM has dubbed New India. And the old India, fought for by the blood of our forefathers and birthed in the crucible of our national struggle, the fundamental premise that was ultimately forged was that of access to a historically inalienable set of freedoms, the freedom of choice being prime. The freedom to choose what government you wanted, the freedom to choose what set of convictions you wish to resonate with, the freedom to choose who to love and how to love, the freedom to choose what to wear, eat, drink, and speak, the freedom to move freely within the sovereign borders of the Republic, and the freedom to choose whether Ram or Rahim or Jesus or Jehovah was the force that for you guides and moves the cosmos. All of these are freedoms enshrined in our Constitution and embedded not just in the letter and spirit of our democracy, but into the lived experience of India and its people. So when Prime Minister Modi speaks of a new India, can we shelve these elements of the old India? Can we actually not look at the sad, sad gap between the Achhe Din that are promised in exchange for the transformations of our democracy into the system the Hindutva movement wants, and the reality of ordinary people in the present today? The road to Mr. Modi's new India appears littered with the wreckage of all that was good and noble about the old India. In its place, an ugly distortion of the Indian idea is rising. An India where an especially dangerous and perverted form of ethno-nationalism seems to be fostered and a narrow-minded majoritarianism prevails, where incidents of communal violence proliferate, driven by mob lynching zealots and Gaurakshak vigilantes. And here, even Bharat Mata Ki Jai and Jai Shri Ram, instead of being the beautiful slogans that Indians are free to cherish and use, have become rallying cries of bigotry and hatred for others. Human beings have been assaulted and killed in the name of cow protection. Muslims and Dalits have been victimized. The father of an Air Force Havildar, a 15-year-old boy returning from Eid shopping, a dairy farmer transporting cows with a permit, Dalits doing their job of skinning a dead cow. All of these people have been casualties of this new India. And that's why the scholar Pratap Bhanu Mehta fittingly asked, how did this fantasy of hope, painted in the colors of a nation marching to one tune and one purpose, completely blanket out the actual republic of fear? Now, this republic of fear was only hinted at in the first innings of Modi's BJP government. It's become, sadly, for all the examples I gave you, a sad but challenging reality. And so this ideology of Hindutva nationalism threatens both the democratic constitution on which our system rests, as well as the experience of ordinary Indians under our democratic system. In addition, we all know the post-COVID world may embrace isolationism and protectionism enthusiastically, because the pandemic has confirmed for many that in times of crisis, people rely on their own governments to shield them, and that they don't want to depend on foreign countries for essential goods. They want more self-reliance or Atmanirbharta, and they therefore tend to give more power to their own governments in the hope that they will actually protect people in the face of this great threat. So what we've seen with our government is that they have, in speaking about putting the nation's needs over individual citizens' freedoms, they began dispensing with many democratic niceties. Federalism, gone when the lockdown was proclaimed by Mr. Modi at 3 hours' notice without even consulting state governments. Law and order is supposed to be a state subject. Yet, the lockdown was enforced by policemen wielding lathis on the basis of an order from the Prime Minister and not one made by each state government. It's gone. Committees didn't meet for months. Parliament itself, since the lockdown on 24th of March, has only met for 10 days in a delayed and truncated monsoon session. The winter session has been cancelled. When does parliamentary oversight, so indispensable in democracy, actually happen? All of these things raise real questions of what is going to happen to our democracy when the atmosphere created by the virus has empowered those who seek to spread another contagion, that of communal hatred and bigotry in the cause of Hindutva. So my worry for democracy is compounded by the fact that using the pandemic, we are seeing an increase in surveillance. Many of you remember the time when the Arogya Setu app was made compulsory. Ostensibly, the good reason is that it can trace your contacts if you come across somebody with COVID who's on the app. But what about those situations in which, unfortunately, the app remains on your phone and it can show who you're visiting, who you're meeting, if you're attending an opposition rally? Is that the kind of information the government ought to be collecting from a compulsory app, still compulsory for government servants? Look at what's happening to the non-elected autonomous institutions that in our democracy are supposed to provide checks and balances to the overweening power of the state. The judiciary, the media, civil society, NGOs, the Election Commission, the Reserve Bank, all of those are under greater or lesser degrees of pressure to honor the electoral verdict, they're being told, rather than subverting it through the freedom of their institutional functioning. The populists have a good rationale. Being unelected, you have no right, they say, to these institutions to constrain the popularly elected government. So when you go too far, you must be brought to heel. But this delegitimizes their autonomy, and already we are seeing the delegitimization of dissent, when even a legitimate protest constitutionally permitted under our democracy against the CAA in UP was not just forbidden, but the protesters were subject to fines, confiscation of their property, and even arrest. And a young pregnant woman was in jail for several months by the UP government. So I will conclude by saying India needs to reclaim its soul. And the urgent challenge, therefore, is to restore, empower, and renew the very institutions of our democracy and civic nationalism that the BJP has commandeered and weakened. These are the institutions that can best protect the minorities and the marginalized, protect free speech and the expression of unfashionable or unpopular opinions, elevate principles and values above the interests of politicians in power, offer shelter and aid to the vulnerable, and so create the habits and conventions that make democracy the safest of political systems for ordinary people to live under. This is what true civic nationalism is about, and the only nationalism, as I argue, in the battle of belonging that is suited to India. We should be speaking of a common future rather than a divided past. That should be the new India we want to build, a new India where you won't get lynched for the food you eat, marginalized for the faith you hold dear, criminalized for the person you love. We're seeing people being locked up in UP with the excuse of love jihad, imprisoned for making use of fundamental rights guaranteed by your own constitution. Instead, we must look forward to a new India that celebrates and welcomes pluralism, an idea vindicated by history itself, and one that is uniquely suited to our country. This new India must be fundamentally rooted in the idea of India and of our Indian democracy that our founding fathers believed in. Because to me, I've asked this question in a different context in my book about the British imperialists. If you don't know where you're coming from, then how can you know where you're going? The answer for India lies in a reaffirmation of patriotism, not an empty jingoistic patriotism, not ethnic nationalism masquerading as love of country, but a patriotism of multiple local territorialities that celebrates pluralism and democracy. That, to my mind, will be a reaffirmation of the idea of India, of the unity and diversity that is our great strength, that will bring us all together, because our new India must be an India that respects all religions, all faiths, all beliefs, all cultures, all languages, all regions, all castes, and all classes. An India where it does not matter what religion you practice, what language you speak, what caste you were born into, what color your skin is. It should only matter that you're Indian. That's what democracy guarantees you. We believe in an India that unites our people. They seek to divide us. Our ideology binds our people together. Theirs separates one Indian from another. And that's why we must have democracy. we must be able to safeguard and protect our own future. Because their idea of New India is one of exhortation. Slogans, one after the other: Make in India, Digital India, Startup India, Stand Up India, Sit Down India. We're not going to sit down. We must stand up for our rights. We must have an India of consultation, of democratic debate and disagreement, of coming to consensus through argument and agreement. We must never speak of India shining without asking who India is shining for. And we must ensure that our democracy will shine, but it must shine for all. Thank you very much. I look forward to the rest of this meeting. Thank you for the opportunity to deliver this lecture in memory of Brajamohan Mohanty. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir. Is Sucharita Mohanty ji, are you audible? I mean, can you hear?
Yeah. I'm sorry, sir.
Kindly
There was
continue.
some technical snag, and actually our PCC President Niranjan Patnaik, is ready to welcome you, sir. We're sorry that we couldn't go by the format of the meeting.
That's perfectly all right.
So he is very much present. He would like to say a few words in your honor and welcome you to our land of Kalinga. That is.
Yes, I knew.
and
Ashoka's Kalinga.
So you are from God's own country and Jagannath Puri. So, sir, I think I should request our PCC President Niranjan Patnaik to address and give you a welcome address and welcome you, sir.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I must say that that the honest truth is that I have come to Jagannath Puri myself. So even though I've come from God's own country, I think every part of India is God's own country in its own way. Yes, I look forward to Mr. Patnaik. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely right. Sir, I would request Niranjan Patnaik ji to give his welcome address. Sir.
Patnaik ji, you have to unmute yourself. You're muted, sir.
Yeah.
He's muted, Sucharita ji.
Let me see. That's the problem. A lot of people, they don't know how to. Yeah.
Dr. Tharoor ji, your welcome address has already been given. I need not repeat it.
No, we are waiting for you. But the format was slightly, but you have to welcome.
But let me thank you for having me in your company. Had it not been for COVID, I would have been next to you in Odisha. But here at least I have a chance to see you virtually.
You are always welcome to Lord of Jagannath. And I am thank you very much for meeting you on this occasion. I have heard your speech in the British Parliament, which you made a few years back. From that day onwards, I was very much keen to meet you personally and to give you thanks the way you made that speech before the Britishers. I am proud of you. I am proud of you and pray God, people like you should more and more burn in India so that our pride can be kept. And as regards Brajamohan Mohanty ji, he is my guru, a great leader of our state, and from the grassroots level to the top level, he has inspired many youths of Odisha to be in Congress. And I'm really very grateful and I'm lucky that I've heard your speech.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for those gracious words. I'm truly touched. They always say it's never too late to say kind words. So it doesn't matter if you miss the welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll meet you sometime in Delhi. Thank you very much. Please visit.
Sir, we can start the interactive session now. So I think our moderator of today's evening can start the procedure interactive session. There are some questions for you, sir. If you
Yes, I'll be happy to answer the questions. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Who is asking the questions?
Yeah. Over to Priya Ranjan Das.
Hello, Priya Ranjan. Go ahead.
Good evening, Dr. Tharoor, and good evening to everybody. erudite address as always. After this, so many professionals and honorable MLAs, honorable MP who are here, and all the distinguished guests, they would like to have this little Q&A. I know that you may not have much time, and I think 20 minutes is what is being proposed.
I have to leave you at 8 o'clock, unfortunately. So now it's down to 15. Let's be
Okay.
quick about
That would be,
yes, sir.
I think as many as we can accommodate, we would like to go ahead and do that. To set the ball rolling, if I may myself ask a question, that is, you see, on the one hand, we see today the hollowing out of democracy by the way you also referred to some of it. But the institutional, the dismantling of the institutional framework. And at the same time, we are today witnessing a winter of discontent. We see lakhs of farmers who are on the street protesting, and there are protests and dissent, and so that is the other aspect of Indian democracy that we see. So how do you look at the two apparently contradictory position? Is the democracy in India getting strengthened, or it is hollowed out?
No, as I said in the course of my main remarks, I believe democracy was deepening and strengthening until, unfortunately, we saw the developments of the tendencies that I mentioned. We are still a democracy. In fact, the fact that I can make this speech in India proves we're a democracy. But I would argue that democracy is not only about winning elections every 5 years and doing as you please in between. I believe it's also about autonomous institutions that are credible and free of government control. I also believe it's about consultation with stakeholders, with ordinary citizens, for example, with farmers in the present context, that you would essentially be accountable on a daily basis. Somebody once said democracy is a daily referendum. So you may have an election only after 5 years, you have your secure majority till then, but you are accountable to the people daily. And in our system, you're accountable to the people through Parliament. But Parliament is not being allowed to meet, is not being allowed to discuss the major issues. And as a result, you're seeing a hollowing out of Parliament as an institution as well. So to my mind, yes, we are a democracy, but the great strength and the deepening of the strength of our democracy has been undermined by an approach by the present government that is taking it in a different direction, diluting the autonomy of institutions, hollowing them out, so that the Election Commission, which was very robust, as you remember, for many years, essentially even telling the ruling party what it could and could not do, is now seems to be much more susceptible to responding to the wishes of the government. We are seeing example after example of situations in which other autonomous institutions, from the Reserve Bank of India to the independent regulators in various domains, somehow seem to be aware of what the government wants them to do. Even the judiciary, legitimate questions have been asked about whether, instead of the judiciary being a completely independent institution, whether very often the court has not become an executive court, to quote one legal scholar. So all of these questions have to be raised, not to say that democracy doesn't exist, but to say that these are the threats to the future of our democracy, which was the topic of our talk today.
I think there were several related questions that to my question that has been raised. Mr. Manas, for instance, has asked that when protesters are labeled as Khalistanis or as Naxalites or as sponsored by Pakistan or China, and what do you think the role of Supreme Court, which has been a sort of a last resort of sort for citizens' right to protest and their other democratic right?
Well, first of all, the delegitimization of dissent is what our friend Mr. Manas is talking about. In other words, what Manas is saying is, if you start challenging people's patriotism every time they protest by saying that they are actually acting at the behest of a foreign power, or that they are deshdrohis in one shape or the other, then you are in fact delegitimizing their democratic rights. In the process, you're actually undermining democracy itself. That's essentially what we're seeing. When I quoted Pratap Bhanu Mehta talking about the Republic of Fear, obviously people will be afraid if they are being portrayed as everything from Khalistanis who are, after all, trying to break up the country, or Pakistani agents who are obviously acting at the behest of a hostile power or whatever. All of these charges are absolutely worrying, and that creates fear, which is the antidote, unfortunately, to democratic confidence, which we all want to feel. I'm not sure the Supreme Court alone is the answer. The Supreme Court is part of the answer, as your questioner suggested, because that Supreme Court is going to be taking up only cases. So where a case comes up and the court decides to hear it, then you can say, where is the Supreme Court? So certainly, for example, many of the Kashmiris who filed habeas corpus petitions that the Supreme Court failed to take up have every right to say the Supreme Court let them down, that their democratic rights to know what is the reason for their detention and why they're not being released were allowed to go by the board, by the Supreme Court. That's a fair criticism. But somebody else, a television news anchor from Bombay, who was able to appeal to the Supreme Court because he was put in jail and he got out within a few hours of his appeal being heard, that suggests the court can be active when it chooses to be. So let's be very realistic and say that the court is not the only answer. Public opinion is part of the answer. The media should stop playing along with the typecasting of dissent as illegitimate or unpatriotic. Why should the media report these charges uncritically instead of saying, sorry, this is not true, these are genuine farmers, so-and-so is an old lady whose grandson has sacrificed his life on the Ladakh border for this nation. How can we call her a Khalistani or an anti-national or a Deshdrohi? These are things that people have to understand, that we simply cannot allow the government's political agenda to destroy the true essence of our democracy. And that was the thrust of the latter part of my speech.
Dr. Ranjit is asking, has the Hinduization of a communally intended political agenda of the RSS BJP government overriding the efforts and of the secular democratic India? Now, well, with that, if I may club, so many other questions that have come up related to that, is that somebody is asking, who hasn't given his name, I can only see a telephone number, how to counter communal virus of the so-called New India. What is the role that Indian National Congress can play?
Okay, well, these are slightly different questions. On the first one about the communal agenda of the RSS and BJP, I would still argue that they have not succeeded. First of all, let's be realistic. Our constitution is a secular constitution, even if they succeed in removing the word secular from it. Because the truth is that a constitution that gives you the freedom of worship, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and even the freedom to propagate your religion is essentially a secular constitution, whether you call it secular or not. So to be honest, I wouldn't worry. I mean, obviously they're trying to send a signal if they remove the word secular from the preamble. But if it's there and it's not there, it doesn't change anything. The structure of the constitution is a secular one. But there are some other issues. The political agenda, as Dr. Ranjit rightly said, has to be looked at. There's no question that BJP won 31% of the vote in 2014 and 37% in 2019. Is that a communal majority? No. The communal majority in India, the Indian population of Hindus is about 80%. So if we have 80% Hindus and a total of 37% of the population voted for you, I would argue that not even a majority of the Hindu population is in favor of Hindutva. And I would even go further and say many of the 37% did not vote for the government because of Hindutva, but because of whatever, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, or toilets and gas cylinders in the villages, or electrification, or even national security in the wake of Pulwama and Balakot, not because they want to demonize Muslims or promote Hindutva. So you're looking now at a situation where the government is trying to create the impression that they speak for a majority of the Indian people, but they don't. They can only speak for an electoral majority, and that is not the same as a genuine majority in the country. So I would say communalization is a threat to democracy, but resisting communalization is still feasible, and that majority of Hindus who can say to the BJP, you don't speak in our name, we all need to stand up and say this is not right. This is not Hinduism. Hinduism is about accepting other forms of worship and other forms of being. That's what we've been taught by Swami Vivekananda onwards. Let us not allow the BJP to define Hindutva in a way that makes all Hindus complicit in their communal political agenda.
Mr. Samarendra Mishra is asking, how do you view the role of regional parties in looking at the future of Indian democracy?
Well, I think that they should really start to being serious about the future, because at the moment, what we're seeing with many of the regional parties, I won't name any names because we have to live and work with everybody, but many of the regional parties seem to be thinking that if they can make their peace with the BJP at the center by not opposing the BJP on some of its rather regressive policies and communal messages, that in turn the BJP will let them flourish on their own in peace in their states. So in other words, it's what you might call a Faustian bargain with the devil, where the regional party says, I will not bother you in Delhi. In fact, I will support whatever you want me to support in Parliament or either House of Parliament, or I will not oppose your governmental edicts. In turn, give me a free hand in my state, give me whatever resources I need, give me support, give me money, etc. And that bargain may strike these parties in the short term as a good idea. But they should realize that once they have completely empowered the BJP at the center, it will be very easy for that center to ride roughshod over the rights of the states. We already saw this with the lockdown declaration. As I said, lockdowns and law and order are the prerogative of the state government, but instead we have seen the central government going ahead and ignoring the need to consult the states. A second example is what happened with Article 370. Let me be very clear, I said this in Parliament. What was done to Jammu and Kashmir can be done to any state in the Union. All you have to do is declare President's rule, get the governor you have appointed to convey to you the consent of the state, and you can do anything to the laws and practices and conventions affecting that state. That's what they did to Kashmir. It was their governor who, in the name of Kashmir, agreed to the abrogation of Article 370. That's not what our democracy should be all about. So if the regional parties do not stand up for their own rights and their own space, tomorrow I fear they'll have nothing left, because the BJP can do to them what it's done to the government in Kashmir or what can do anywhere else. So there are some real dangers as far as the regional parties are concerned. I hope that they will realize that their strength lies in federalism and in supporting democratically minded parties like the Congress that are prepared to support federalism as a priority above the interests, the temporary short-term interests of a central government.
Ranjan Das ji, I think that would be our last question, because
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I think that's what I was going to say myself. I was going to say that there are a flood of questions, and with Dr. Tharoor, everybody would like to interact with him.
But there is no end to it. We have to.
Yes, I know, and that's why this is the last question, as Madam is suggesting. And so let me ask the last question, which is come from Engineer Shashwat Kumar Mohanty. Now, he wants to know how important it is that you dismantle or you put the British-made Parliament House into a museum and create a new Parliament building and modify the central vista in New Delhi, the national capital. What do you think? How is it important for the future of Indian democracy, or is it an attempt to go on history? How do you look at this whole question? If you could.
Well, it's a very good question. Let me just say very simply 2 or 3 things before we wrap up. Number one, the building is not what matters, it's what goes on inside the building that matters. So inside a parliament, if there is meaningful democracy and discussion, if there are questions being asked by the opposition given serious answers, if bills are made only through legitimate consultation and legislation, if parliamentary committees are able to weigh in on these things, if there is a collegial atmosphere in which government consults the opposition with respect, all of these things, then it would little matter if the building is old and decrepit or whether the building is new and spanking and modern. So the first thing is the substance is what matters. The second observation is that our building is genuinely a bit old. It's very tightly packed. It's very difficult. For example, a woman MP has to literally brush past the knees and legs of half a dozen MPs just to get to her seat. This is not right. It's not particularly modern. If you go and look at even the parliament of our neighboring country, Bangladesh, not too far from where you are, you'll be impressed by the space they have for each MP, the desks, the computer screens, the chairs, all of that are at a totally different level. I think it's somewhat embarrassing for us as the biggest, richest, highest GDP country in South Asia to have such a poor parliament. So I'm not opposing the need for a new, improved, or at least renovated parliament. But I would question, and this is my third and last point, the timing and nature of this decision. At a time when the nation is suffering, could this need, legitimate as the need is, not have been deferred? If the BJP couldn't do it earlier in the last 6 years, let them wait another 6 years or whatever it takes for us to recover from the ravages of COVID. We have now the highest unemployment ever recorded in India. Let these people find jobs again. We have a plummeting economic growth. Let growth come back again. We have exports down, manufacturing down, industry down. Let these things revive again. Then when the economy is once again doing well and we can point with pride to India's growth and development, at that time, let's build a new parliament with pride. I'm saying there is a difference between the value of a new building and the timing of putting it up, and even the purpose for which the government is doing it is really for the greater glory of the present authorities around the time of the 75th anniversary. And I think that is also, frankly, a bit embarrassing and a bit unworthy. Surely this country has higher priorities right now. They could have easily come back. How does it matter if you don't have the wonderful moment of the 75th anniversary? If you've actually looked after your people and more millions of your people have 3 square meals a day, isn't that better than having a new building that they can point to tomorrow? I would rather we had kept that building waiting. We need the building, but we can have it later and work for the country and its people today. That's my thought. Once again, thank you all very much for these excellent and stimulating questions, and appreciate you, Priya Ranjan, for pulling them together.
Yes, as usual, Dr. Tharoor said, India matters. I should matter to India. Today, in this speech, he has again, shown us all that how he's an Indian first, and how passionately he feels about democracy in India, and his concerns that he has put forward. So I think Sucharita ji would like to give a vote of thanks, and then we can come to the end of this program. We haven't exceeded the time too much, I hope.
I think quickly, since Dr. Tharoor has got some other engagements, I'll have to quickly wind up the Thanksgiving bit. Sir, thanks a lot for joining us and giving us the time. We are in AIBC is in the is struggling to expand and strengthen in Odisha. I think this meeting will help us to reach out to our professionals in Odisha. And Sir Niranjan Patnaik ji, thank you for joining and welcoming our chairman, Dr. Tharoor. Jarita Madam, thanks for being with us always and working and encouraging us, always being with us. And last but not the least, our AIPC team, both national as well as Odisha AIPC team, those who worked very hard to make this program and make it successful or whatever that today we managed. And thanks a lot, everybody. I won't take much time because sir is in a hurry he has other engagements.
Thank you, Sucharita. I really appreciate it. Yes, I do have to leave now, but I'm very grateful. And I'm sure we can post a recording of this conversation on the web so that others will watch it. It'll be a pleasure. Thank you all and good luck
to have you again.
Good luck to AIPC Odisha and to all of my colleagues there. Good luck. All the best.
Thank you.
All the good work. Thank you.
Ma'am, with your permission, can I end the session, please?
No, sir has left, but who all are the is around, so I should thank everybody now. Our own team, core team, organizing team, Shashwat, Manisha, Ramakant Babu, Lalatende Babu, Shamajit Babu, Nikita, especially you have done a lot.
It's my pleasure entirely, ma'am. Thank you.
And Arnabji, you are here. I can see Arnabji very quietly with his absence, quite presence. He has helped us a lot. Thanks a lot, all of you.
Thank you, ma'am.
It was
Thank
really
you, everybody.
it was lovely to have you all. Hopefully, we'll have another meeting without any lag. That is, of course, and looking forward to it. Well, thank you all. Have a